Joshua chapter 10. The sun stands still. When Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them. He feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were mighty. So Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, sent to Hoham, king of Hebron, to Phiram, king of Jarmuth, to Zaphia, king of Lachish, and to Debir, king of Eglon, saying, Come up to me, and help me, and let us smite Gibeon. And for it has made peace with Joshua and with the people of Israel. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered their forces and went up with all their armies and encamped against Gibeon and made war against it. And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal, saying, Do not relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly, and save us, and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites that dwell in the hill country are gathered against us. So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. There shall not a man of them stand before you. So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal, and the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth-horon, and smote them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the ascent of Beth-horon, the Lord threw down great stones from heaven upon them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the men of Israel killed with the sword. Then spoke Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the men of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still at Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Arzalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? The sun stayed in the midst of heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord hearkened to the voice of a man. For the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. 5 kings defeated. These 5 kings fled and hid themselves in the cave at Makkedah. And it was told Joshua, The 5 kings have been found hidden in the cave at Makkedah. And Joshua said, Roll great stones against the mouth of the cave, and set men by it to guard them. But do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies. Fall upon their rear. Do not let them enter their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. When Joshua and the men of Israel had finished slaying them with a very great slaughter, until they were wiped out, and when the remnant which remained of them had entered into the fortified cities, all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. Not a man moved his tongue against any of the people of Israel. Then Joshua said, Open the mouth of the cave, and bring those 5 kings out to me from the cave. And they did so, and brought those 5 kings out to him from the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And when they brought those kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the men of Israel, and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with them, Come near, put your feet upon the necks of these kings. Then they came near and put their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to them, Do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and of good courage, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. And afterward Joshua smote them and put them to death. And he hung them on 5 trees, and they hung upon the trees until evening. But at the time of the going down of the sun, Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves. And they set great stones against the mouth of the cave, which remain to this very day. And Joshua took Makkedah on that day, and smote it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed every person in it. He left none remaining. And he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua passed on from Makkedah, and all Israel with him, to Libnah, and fought against Libnah. And the Lord gave it also and its king into the hand of Israel, and he smote it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it. He left none remaining in it, and he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. And Joshua passed on from Libnah, and all Israel with him, to Lachish, and laid siege to it, and assaulted it. And the Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel, and he took it on the 2nd day, and smote it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it, as he had done to Libnah. Then Horam, king of Gezer, came up to help Lachish, and Joshua smote him and his people until he left none remaining. And Joshua passed on with all Israel from Lachish to Eglon, and they set siege to it and assaulted it, and they took it on that day, and smote it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it he utterly destroyed that day. And he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua went up with all Israel from Eglon to Hebron, and they assaulted it, and took it, and smote it with the edge of the sword, and its king, and its towns, and every person in it. he left none remaining. And he had done to Eglon, and utterly destroyed it with every person in it. Then Joshua with all Israel turned back to Debir and assaulted it, and he took it with its king and all its towns, and they smote them with the edge of the sword, and utterly destroyed every person in it. He left none remaining, as he had done to Hebron and to Libnah and its king. So he did to Debir and to its king. So Joshua defeated the whole land, the hill country and the Negev and the lowland and the slopes and all their kings. He left none remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel commanded. And Joshua defeated them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza, and all the country of Goshen as far as Gibeon. And Joshua took all these kings and their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. Joshua chapter 11. The united kings of northern Canaan defeated. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and to the king of Achshapha, and to the kings who were in the northern hill country, and in the Arabah south of Chinroth, and in the lowland, and in Nephod on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Jebusites in the hill country, the Hivites under Hermon in the land of Mizpah. And they came out with all their troops, a great host in number like the sand that is upon the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. And all these kings joined their forces, and came and encamped together at the waters of Merom to fight with Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give over all of them slain to Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." So Joshua came suddenly upon them with all his people of war by the waters of Merom, and fell upon them. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel, who smote them and chased them as far as Great Sidon and Mispheraim, and eastward as far as the valley of Mizpah, and they smote them until they left none remaining. And Joshua did to them as the Lord bade him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. And Joshua turned back at that time and took Hazor and smote its king with the sword. For Hazor formerly was the head of all those kingdoms, and they put to the sword all who were in it, utterly destroyed them. There was none left that breathed, and he burned Hazor with fire, and all the cities of those kings, and all their kings Joshua took and smote them with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. But none of the cities that stood on mounts did Israel burn, except Hazor only, that Joshua burned. And all the spoil of these cities and the cattle the people of Israel took for their booty. But every man they smote with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them. and they did not leave any that breathed, as the Lord had commanded Moses his servant. So Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. Summary of Joshua's conquest. So Joshua took all that land, the hill country, and all the Negev, and all the land of Goshen, and the lowland, and the Arab, and the hill country of Israel, and its lowland, from Mount Halak, that rises towards Seir, as far as Balgad, in the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. And he took all their kings and smote them and put them to death. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. There was not a city that made peace with the people of Israel, except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. They took all in battle. For it was the Lord's doing to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, in order that they should be utterly destroyed and should receive no mercy, but be exterminated, as the Lord commanded Moses. And Joshua came out at that time and wiped out the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments, and the land had rest from war. Joshua chapter 12. The kings conquered by Moses. Now these are the kings of the land whom the people of Israel defeated and took possession of their land beyond the Jordan toward the sun rising, from the valley of the Arnon to Mount Hermon, with all the Arabah eastward. Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon, and ruled from Eror, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, and from the middle of the valley as far as the river Jabbok, the boundary of the Ammonites, that is, half of Gilead, and the Arab to the sea of the Shinneroth eastward, and in the direction of Beth Jeshimoth to the city of the Arabah, the salt sea, southward to the foot of the slopes of Pisgah, and Og, king of Bashan, one of the remnant of the Rephaim, who dwelt at Ashroth and at Edrei, and ruled over Mount Hermon, and Salekah, and all Bashan to the boundary of the Geshurites and the Mekatites, and over half of Gilead to the boundary of Sihon, king of Heshbon. Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the people of Israel defeated them. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave their land for a possession to the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh. The kings conquered by Joshua. And all these are the kings of the land whom Joshua and the people of Israel defeated on the west side of the Jordan, from Balgad in the valley of the Lebanon to Mount Halak, that rises towards Seir. And Joshua gave their land to the tribes of Israel as a possession according to their allotments, in the hill country, in the lowland, in the Arba, in the slopes, in the wilderness, and in the Negev, and the land of Hittites, and Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivitites, and the Jebusites. The king of Jericho, one, the king of Ai, which is beside Bethel, one. The king of Jerusalem, one. The king of Hebron, one. The king of Jarmuth, one. The king of Lachish, one. The king of Eglon, one. The king of Gezer, one. The king of Debir, one. The king of Geder, one. The king of Hormah, one. The king of Arad, one. The king of Libnah, one. The king of Adullam, one. The king of Makeda, one. The king of Bethel, one. The king of Tapua, one. The king of Heper, one. The king of Aphek, one. The king of Fleshron, one. The king of Madon, one. The king of Hazar, one. The king of Shimron, Meron, one. The king of Akswa, one. The king of Tanek, one. The king of Megiddo, one. The king of Kedesh, one. The king of Joknam in Carmel, one. The king of Dor in Naphedor, one. The king of Goim in Galilee, one. The king of Tirzah, one. In all 31 kings.